Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Money Bear Podcast. I'm your host, Chloe Daniels, better known as Chloe Bear Money Coach on the internet. And this is the podcast where we talk about all things money. So, anyway, welcome back. Generally, I'll ramble for the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, give you guys a little money tip, and then dive into this week's episode. And we're going to do exactly that. So, let's see, what life updates do I have to share with you guys? I think I already told you on last week's episode that I am back in my hometown. I have decided to delay going to San Diego for a few months while I figure out some business stuff and honestly just take some time for myself because your girl is really burnt out on travel right now. In fact, this last weekend, I went up to Chicago for the weekend to see some friends and just be like, hey, I'm back. It's me. It's been 9 months since I've seen all of you guys, which is enough time to have a baby. So what's up? And I just felt really tired the whole time. I felt a little bit resentful the whole time, not of the people I was seeing, just of the fact that I had to be in Chicago. I was so just not having it. And before I left for this road trip, I used to love Chicago. Chicago was my favorite place. It was a place that for a while that I thought I saw myself living for a really long time. But when I got back to Chicago this time around, I was like, I don't like this. I don't want to live here. Everything is chaotic. Everything takes twice as long to get done. I'm just tired of this. I want ease. I want things to just work. I don't want to have to drive 2 hours or 2 miles away and it take 2 hours, not 2 hours, but at least 20 minutes. And it's just I don't want to do this. In fact, I went and saw my ex-boyfriend, AKA Logan's dad, and he lives about an hour away from the city. But the day that I went to see him started torrential downpour, and it took 2 hours to see him, to drive up there, just to drive up there. And while I was doing it, I was just why? Why am I doing? Why? So yeah, I don't think I will be going back to Chicago anytime soon. I might go to the suburbs to see my friends, but I'm just real tired, guys. I need a break. So I know I've been telling you guys that for a while, but now I'm actually doing it. I'm not going anywhere except for the first weekend in December. I will probably be going somewhere to celebrate somebody's birthday, but that's it. And then I'm done. Until further notice, until I no longer feel burnt out. Okay. So there might be some boring stuff going on in the Clover world. But that's where I'm at. And sometimes things are not glamorous. Sometimes things are just okay, it's time to buckle down and get to work. So, but now in Central Illinois, we're at the time of the year where the sun starts going down at 4:20 p.m. In fact, it's 4:19 as I'm recording this on November 9th, and the sun has already started to go down. And I'm just oh, cool, my lighting is going to disappear forever. Great. But I don't know, I kind of like it. It's nice having seasons, and when I move to San Diego, I probably won't be having seasons anymore. So we'll see. I gotta appreciate the last seasons I get before I move. So anyway, for this week's money tip, I really want to talk to you guys about the importance of still investing when stock prices are down. A lot of people, when I ask them if they are investing this year or why they have not started investing this year, the answer is because they want to wait until stock prices go back up. And I want you to know that that is exactly what you should not be doing. So first of all, the number one thing you need to be doing when you are preparing for a recession or things like that is you do have to make sure your finances are in order. Investing is not the number one priority when we're dealing with a potential recession. Your number one priority are all the same things that we talk about in normal life. Making sure you have an emergency fund, making sure it's 3 to 6 months of your emergency expenses, making sure that you've got your high interest debt paid off, making sure that you've got things that will protect your income, that you don't just rely on one income source, that you've actually got multiple different things that you can do for your income sources, and making sure that you're still freaking investing. We want to be investing all of the time, but in a recession, if you are facing potential job loss, potential loss of income, we have to make sure that emergency fund is set. So if you do not have an emergency fund right now, I want to first give you permission to pause the investing, not the 401k match. Always get your 401k or 403b or 457 match, no matter what. But if you're doing a lot of investing and you need to take a moment to prioritize the emergency fund, that is okay. We want to make sure that you're going to be good and in this game for the long term. And an emergency fund is a really great way to protect yourself no matter what happens. So that's number one. But if you have the emergency fund, you've done things to protect your job, you've paid off your high interest debt, I personally think that now is just as an important time to be investing, if not more, as any other time. And here is why. Think of if your favorite store like Sephora or Apple went on sale for 20 to 30% off all of a sudden. Would you just like run out of the store and be like, nah, I'm going to wait until the stock prices go back up. I'm going to wait until those lipsticks I want to go back up to full price and maybe even more. Would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you do that, right? Instead, you're like, oh, this is a good opportunity to buy that lipstick that I have been waiting to buy. This is a great opportunity to stock up on my essentials. This is a great opportunity for me to go ahead and stock up. So why do we do that with the stock market? We always do that with the stock market. People see stock prices going down and they run out of the store. But here's the thing, especially in the type of investing that I teach. In investing, when you're doing it through low-cost diversified index funds, is like you got a bundle of 500 of the largest companies in the US inside of it for one price. That bundle, what's really, really cool about that bundle is changing. You're not doing anything, though, to make sure it changes. It goes up in price, it goes down in price, and the companies inside it that even change because the companies inside the index, which is just a grouping of different stocks, are changing. How? Well, let's say one of those 500 largest, best performing companies in the US inside of that S&P 500 index, let's say one of them stops performing. It's not doing as well anymore. The prices are lowering. It's not producing any revenue like it used to. Well, guess what the S&P 500 index is going to do? They're going to eventually kick it out and replace it with something better. And by you owning the S&P 500 index, by you owning that fund that contains all the stocks inside of the S&P 500, you do not have to do anything to benefit from that. The index fund is going to do it itself. That fund is going to automatically make sure that at any given time, the top 500 companies in the US are inside that fund. Again, you didn't have to do shit. So we need to be investing. Imagine that bundle being 20% off right now, which it is. Imagine it being 30% off like the NASDAQ is. At least I think the last time I checked, it was almost 30%, but that's a lot of major tech companies. Would you all of a sudden say, I don't want it anymore because it's at a lower price? Probably not. Not if we're looking at it as a sale. So I'm going to challenge you, if you've got those things already set, you've got your emergency fund, you've got your recession plan set, there is no reason to not be investing right now. So I actually created something, guys, for you to deal with recessions, because I know recessions are on everyone's minds right now. I created a free recession guide for you. Now, this is another 30-page guide with tons of free shit inside of it. We're talking about what are recessions, what is the context around recession, how do I put together a recession plan, what are the resources that I need to be referring to in order to protect my income, protect my job, all of these things I put inside of this free guide. So you can grab that at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/recession, and we will leave that down in the show notes as well. So again, that free guide is at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/recession. This is a brand new guide that I created just for you for this moment right now. So I hope you guys like it. I spent a lot of time on it, and yeah, we'll put that down in the show notes. So without further ado, let's get to this week's episode. But before we do, friendly reminder to take a second to rate, review, and subscribe to us. It helps us grow. It reminds us that people are listening. It tells us, hey, I like what you're doing and I want to see more of it. So go down there and do that for us. It helps us out a lot. So thank you in advance. And let's get to this week's episode. All right. We are back at the Money Bear, and today we've got a special guest on. We've got Beth, who is the owner of Future Wallet, and Beth and I actually met at FinCon very briefly, and that's when we first got connected. We had messaged back and forth in the DMs a few times, but I'm excited to bring Beth on today to talk kind of about her her career, her negotiating journey, and how she was able to take the leap to a full-time business owner. Welcome to the podcast, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
Yes, for sure. I'm excited to get to know you better as well. And I love talking about like negotiation and career paths. So I think this will be a really fun conversation. So before we dive into the questions that we have for you today, can you give everybody kind of like your elevator speech? Who are you in real life and who are you on the internet?
Absolutely. So I am the founder of Future Wallet, and I work with millennial women to help them better align their money with their values through comprehensive financial education. And so that takes place today through my signature group coaching program, which is called the Build Your Future Wallet program, as well as private coaching that I do, and then public speaking for Fortune 500 companies. So I started my business about a year and a half ago, turned it into my full-time job about 6 months ago, and things have been going really well, steadily growing my business this year. And I've had the opportunity to speak to more than 2,500 women at different events at companies to date. So,
oh, that's so cool. I love that you're doing that. The speaking stuff is always like such a rush. It's like very nerve-wracking leading up to it. And then afterwards, you're always like, I'm so glad I did that and I can't wait to do more, right?
yeah. And I think something that I'm really passionate about is just, destigmatizing these conversations. And I think it's so important to have more people speaking openly about money. And I think that's been really inspirational for me. And I get a lot out of it because I just have so many women reach out to me afterwards saying like, hey, I just like really needed to hear that right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important.
Now that we know a little bit who you are, I know that you have kind of had quite the journey of going from corporate America to working at Google, which is obviously corporate America as well, and then running your own business. So can you kind of tell us what your journey has been like?
For sure. And maybe I can even start just like a little bit earlier of like, how did I even get interested in money to begin with? So I've been fascinated by money since I was a kid. My parents got divorced when I was 3, and they had joint custody of me growing up, but I mostly would live with my mom. She was a single mom, and we were struggling a lot financially. And so I just got like really curious from an early age of like, why is it that I go to my dad's house and things are comfortable and we have money, and I go to my mom's house and suddenly we don't have money, or we're moving all the time because every time our rent goes up, we suddenly need to find a new place to live. And so I just was curious, like it was clear to me that money wasn't a struggle for everyone. And I had this like very clear picture of even my dad's household that I lived in of like, okay, so how does money work and how do we earn more and what's going on with all of us? And so that was sort of how I started getting curious about money. And it led to me in high school. I actually started going to the library and checking out books on personal finance. I was like the total nerd in high school that I was like, if I want to learn something, I'm just going to go read about it.
Oh my gosh, in high school, I'm so impressed that you started like your education in high school. I feel like so many people don't start that young. That's incredible.
What I think is interesting today is that it's actually so much easier than it was for me at the time. Like there was, very limited internet. There was no podcasts. Frankly, the personal finance books that were available were not great. They weren't from a very diverse set of authors. And so I think it's like incredible to be growing up today and have so much more than I had, 20 years ago.
100%.
Yeah. So I got curious about money as a kid. I actually even considered becoming a financial advisor when I was in my early 20s, but I looked around at the industry and felt like it didn't sort of meet my values at the time. And so I instead went on and started teaching personal finance education at a national nonprofit, helping young people of color become first in their family to go to college. And really enjoyed doing that. And then in turn went on to go to business school at UC Berkeley Haas, which is a top business program. And then got an opportunity to intern and then work at Google, like you mentioned. And happy to dive into that. But I think for me, like a big theme in my own journey has just been like realizing how much is possible and what potential is out there. That I personally started my first job out of college. I was making like $34,000 a year. And I negotiated for that salary. And in retrospect, I realized I was really underpaid. And I didn't even know it was possible. And I think that's been like a consistent theme in my journey of understanding what's even possible. And so happy to talk about that today, because I think that a lot of people look at a job like Google and they're like, that's just not feasible. I can't do that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, not everyone's going to get a job at Google, but it is possible for many people who don't believe that today.
100%. And even you talking about like your first job out of college, I resonate with that a lot because not only was it the first job out of college that I did, like I completely failed to negotiate or see my value, where when I graduated from college with 2 degrees, I got a job that paid me $14 an hour, like doing product management or account management at an ATM company. And then when I came back to the United States after living in China for a few years, when I was looking for a job in Chicago, I had no concept of like what the market was. All I was used to was like my small town America, where it's like, $36,000 a year. Like you weren't living in poverty, but I was moving to Chicago. And so I thought, well, $36,000 a year should be fine. Like I'll just ask for that. So in my very first interview, which ended up being the job that I took, I asked for $36,000. And that is the first time in my life and the only time in my life that I asked for something lower than what they offered me. So they offered me 42,000. Then I was like, whoa, that's so much money. And then I got cocky and I was like, well, I should ask for more. I should and when I asked for more that time, they go, excuse me, you came here asking for $36,000. So no, I don't think so. And I was like, all right, I'll be happy for what I get. So I definitely resonate with that. Like, thinking it's a good salary and then coming to reality and being like, oh, wait a second, I don't understand the value of my skills in this marketplace or what I need to be doing to get a better pay.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's okay that we all go through that journey, right? Like we're all going to have an experience of a job negotiation or a salary that isn't, in retrospect what we would have wanted, but we learn from that with time. But I also just think it's so valuable that you have this podcast and your platform to be able to have these conversations so that more people understand what's possible and what's out there.
Yeah, for sure. And same with yours. So yes, I do think that people who are listening are going to be like, all right, Beth, we need you to tell us more about how you got into Google, because I have no doubt that many people are wondering that. And also it seems like such a coveted thing, breaking into tech. And it also just seems like this impossible thing, especially for people who are like maybe studied liberal arts or who don't have like a tech specific job or experience. So can you kind of tell us like, what led you there? What was like, how did you do anything specific that you think really allowed you to get in at Google?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually applied for the job. So the job that I had at Google for 4 years, I actually applied to it before I even went to business school. And I even got an internal referral because I had, heard from friends that the best way to get a job at many of these companies is have someone refer you. And I didn't get an offer to interview. Nothing happened with that. And then transparently, I went to business school and then all of a sudden I got an offer to interview with having the same work experience that I had before and pretty much the same resume. And so I do think it's important to acknowledge that I do think that there's a lot of screening and gatekeeping that occurs in a lot of companies. And it does really vary by company, but I still think that there is a lot of element of recruiters are looking for certain like markers of sort of status or prestige to indicate someone's skill set. And so there is a certain, degree of like, oh, if this person got into a top business school, then we think that they have like the skills that we're looking for. But the reality is, this is my personal perspective, there are many people out there that are very qualified for a job that may not have those like status markers. So I think it's important to acknowledge that occurs to some degree today. And I think that some companies are doing a better job to change that. And I will say I even saw Google doing a better job in the time that I was there and having less of an emphasis on some of those things. But I think it's just important to acknowledge that and then acknowledge that exacerbates the economic equality that we see today. And I am happy to chat about some sort of tips and strategies that I think would be helpful that I learned in my time there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I do think it's just like it's important to acknowledge our different privileges, when talking about finance. I think that that's so important because it's like we can't just, blame it on bootstrapping. We can't say, oh, well, if you just like pull up your boots and work really hard, anybody can do it. I think it is important to be, honest about the inequalities and the biases that exist and the things that are definitely gatekept. So I appreciate you doing that.
Sure thing. I think it's even important like to think about how I even got into business school. Like it's very difficult to get into a top business program if you don't know people who have gotten into a top business program, and it can help guide you on how to do that. And that was even eye-opening to me. I had a mentor who went to business school and really encouraged me to consider applying. And then in turn, I had a coworker at the nonprofit that I was working for who applied the year before me. And it's pretty unusual that someone in a nonprofit sector goes to business school. But frankly, like if I hadn't had that colleague who was like, hey, these are the things I'm doing, and like this is the test prep I'm doing, and here's how this works, like I don't even know if I would have gotten in. And so
Right.
it occurs even far before your resume gets to HR. It's like starting from when we're, just out of high school, like all the different decisions we're making, the schools we're going to, et cetera, impacts where we end up.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that's always something that I think sometimes people find that to be the frustrating answer when it's like, and I had the same experience when I was climbing the corporate ladder. A lot of the times, the things that happened were because of my network, but it was this conscious network building and this constant reputation building that allowed me to see the big increases that I saw in my income. So it sounds like that was a big, big part of your journey as well. So what would you say for somebody who is trying to pivot into tech or pivot specifically into Google? What are some of like maybe your top 3 tips for someone looking to do that?
Yeah, I do think you're right that network is key. And I think the great thing is that it's never been easier to build your network than it is today in terms of looking and understanding like what type of companies do you want to work at? Where are the people that work at those companies and how do you build a network with them? Like thanks to LinkedIn, thanks to social media platforms, like you can reach out and find these people
Mm-hmm.
and talk to them and ask them about their skills and experience and how they got that role at that company and what they would advice they'd offer you. And so I will say, like, even if you haven't gotten into a top business school or you don't, have that sort of like Ivy League degree on your resume, you can go create that for yourself and find organizations. Like I think the personal finance community is a great example of this on social media and on the internet, of like a community of people who have a similar passion, who build
Yeah,
relationships with each other. And so
truly.
if you're interested in, for instance, getting into tech, but you don't work into tech today, how can you go find like a meetup in your city or an event online that's for, women who are interested in product management, and
Mm-hmm.
go talk to those women at that meetup and be like, hey, I'm really interested in breaking into product management too. Like, can I ask you more about how you got there? Who did you talk to? Would you be willing to take a look at my resume? Like all of those types of things. So I think you
Mm-hmm.
can build your own network. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing that can be really helpful.
Oh, and I think that's huge. And even like you said, mentioning that it is easier more than ever. And it's like you can find a way to network that meets like your preference. So if your preference isn't to go to a live networking event, which a lot of people don't want to do or don't have the time to do, there are online options. I know Eventbrite, like even just scrolling through Eventbrite when I was like living in different cities, I just look at like what's happening in the city that I'm in. I would see so many virtual like women in tech meetups or women who in business meetups and things like that. So there are definitely, like you said, opportunities out there to fit whatever need. And as you're talking, I'm like, I need to tell my sister about this. I'm like, these are such great things I didn't even think of, and I need to like push onto her because she's currently looking for a product manager position.
I love that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think once you kind of start to build this network and talk to these people, I really like this concept of like backwards engineering. Sometimes people will call it, of like, and honestly, this applies to not just professionally, but like when you find someone that you really admire their path and where they are, try to think about like, how do you backwards engineer? Like, where did they get to where they are today? And
Mhm.
like platforms like LinkedIn is a great tool for this, for instance, to like when you find someone, you're like, okay, like what sort of jobs did they had before they got to where they are today? And to literally just talk to people about their experiences and how they're able to get there. I've been so amazed myself, the amount of people that I've just like cold reached out to on LinkedIn who have responded and set up time to chat with me. And so I encourage people to, you may not get a hit of every single person's going to respond to you, but some people will. And it's a skill to like craft a very quick message to them, introducing who you are and making sure that you are specifically speaking to like something that you can offer them in a conversation that makes it worthwhile, that they're like, hey, yeah, I want to be able to have this conversation and help this person out. And I think they'll help me out too. And so having those conversations and asking those people about how did you get to the role that you have today, I think is really helpful as well.
Oh, for sure. And like people always love an opportunity to talk about themselves. So at least that's what I found when I was like cold, especially for like the informational stuff. When you're not asking for really anything other than their story, people love that. And of course you get some no's, but the yeses will make it worth it.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's important to make sure you're not just reaching out to someone and being like, "Hey, you work at Instagram and I want to work at Instagram. So can you refer
Mm-hmm.
to me to a job at Instagram?
Exactly. You can't lead with like this, like, oh, you're already asking something from them when like they don't know anything. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is like even salespeople, like salespeople who are slipping into DMs. It's like rather than getting to know them and understanding their needs and understanding what they're looking for, you just go straight for the like, let me sell you.
Yeah, like looking for a genuine connection. I mean, I think for me personally, something that's been really reaffirming that I'm on the right path professionally is I really enjoy talking to people who are doing similar work to myself or working in the personal finance space. And I think that's really important to think about as well, is like as you're reaching out to people and having these conversations, like, do you actually like talking to
Mm.
people? Like I used to think that networking was kind of icky and I didn't enjoy it. And I realized as I've gotten older, like maybe I just like wasn't talking to the right people. Like I wasn't pursuing the right career path.
Right.
And once you start to have these conversations that you're like, oh, this is actually like really fun, it helps you indicate that you're like going in the right direction. So that's sort of an aside of something to think about as well.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the first tip was essentially leveraging your network. So what would you say your second tip is?
Yeah. So second thing I say combined with that is sort of thinking about backwards engineering. So for those people
Yes.
that you're reaching out to, how do you sort of backwards engineer how they got to where they are today? And then the third thing that I'd say is making sure that your resume is catered to the role.
Mm.
And literally, I think this is one of the things that helped me get an interview at Google is that I happened to go to a network event when I was at business school and chatted with someone who is currently working in finance at Google. And I was sharing a little bit of my background and they're like, hey, you'd be a really good fit for like a summer internship working in finance operations. Like if you're interested, make sure that when you apply, you cater your resume like specifically to speaking to these types of things. And that was helpful for me to know because for Google's MBA internship process, it's basically just like an open process that you
Mhm.
just dump your resume into a bucket and then you don't even know what type of role you're applying to and then they'll reach out if you're a good fit.
That's wild. So they literally just like look at you and your skills and they see like, where will this person be like a good fit, if a fit
Yeah,
at all?
and there's no cover letter. So it's just your resume.
That's wild.
Yes. So, but the thing is, what really helped me is that I wasn't just like putting a random resume into the bucket. I was putting a very strategic resume that was speaking to my experience working in finance operations because I knew that like basically that was the only shot that I was going to have that
Mhm.
my background matched with. And sure enough, I got an interview. And so I think it is really important to make sure to understand that like at a lot of companies, it may not even be a human reviewing resumes for the first batch. It's computers that are scanning things. And so as much as some people like Canva and some of these like pretty softwares, you probably don't want to use that for your resume.
Mm.
You want to use a template that's actually scannable and going to be able to be read by the software. And then secondly, that like you're literally pulling words from the job description and using very similar language in your bullet points.
Mhm.
And then thirdly, like Google has this formula that they talk about publicly on their careers website, and some of their founders talk about it. But in terms of like the actual bullet points, structuring it that like you accomplished blank as measured by blank by doing blank. And so like literally they're kind of giving you the formula of like, here's how to write bullet points.
That totally, yeah, that is like literally the formula. I love that. That's so nice that they're not gatekeeping at least that part.
No, there's actually, if like you just Google, and we can talk a little more about this, it's helpful, but like if you Google like Google hiring criteria, they actually talk about sort of what they use to scan and scan people's competencies during interviews. So I say like as
Mm.
much as you can, do research in advance before you're applying about like what companies are looking for.
Yeah, interesting. I have to ask about the culture of working at Google. Did you feel like, for the most part, were you surrounded just by like because I think a lot of people, and myself included, when we think about working at Google, it's like the brightest minds in the world, and it's like the smartest people, and it's like very, very high functioning human beings. Would you say in the actual like setting, once you're in, that is the reality, is that you're working with a lot of really smart people? Or is it just like in every other corporate setting where you kind of get a mixed bag?
Yeah, I think that is very true. And it's something that a lot of people who work at Google have a sense of imposter syndrome when you
Mm.
start. And I certainly had that myself. I think I had that in going to business school. And then when I went to work at Google, it was just like one level up of like, and it's honestly so much so that they actually in their initial employee training, they talk about imposter syndrome and they talk about how present it is.
Wow.
Yeah, they have senior leaders, at least in the training that I went through. I can't speak to like every site across the country. But they have senior leaders and directors come in and talk about how imposter syndrome has showed up for them in their career. And I think it's really valuable. Google does a lot of internal research about best practices around hiring, cultivating teams, creating psychological safety, all these types of things. And so it's common, right, for a lot of people that are high achieving to experience that. So, but yes, to answer your question, I think it was honestly one of the reasons why it was hard for me to leave is that I just loved, you learn so much being around smart people. It keeps you constantly humble of realizing how much you don't know.
Right.
But also it really allows you to like up level your skills quickly. And so I think it's a great learning. That's like a great takeaway for anyone, no matter where you're working. It doesn't need to be working at Google, but just thinking about like, what type of environment are you in? Are you in an environment in which you're being pushed to grow? You're being exposed to new things, new ideas, new career paths. I think that broadly is really helpful. And it's sort of an
Mhm.
intangible thing that allows you to accelerate and grow in your career.
Right, and that's not something that I don't know if we all think about that when applying for jobs, but, I can only imagine having worked in Google and then leaving, like the amount of value you bring going to another company, especially if it's not at the Google level. It's like you've seen the best practices, you've benefited from working with some of the smartest people in the industry, and now you get to take that and really influence anywhere else you work. Like that was one of the reasons my brother recently, my youngest brother, was deciding between a job between a medical company that's a very large, like pharmaceutical company, and Amazon. And I was like, Ethan, you are 26 years old. Getting Amazon on your resume and the exposure you'll get and just the experience, just do it for a couple of years. And then you can go wherever you want and you're going to be paid more. You're going to be higher value just from having that experience. Like, yes, pharma is also its own beast and like pretty incredible as well. But I feel like the big five, it's really hard to get that kind of unmatched experience.
For sure. And I do think it's like, even if people are not able to get a job at a super, brand name type company, we all are on a journey. Like,
Mhm.
I think sometimes so I'm in my mid 30s, and when I was in my early 20s, I felt like I really needed to like do the right thing and get the right opportunity and negotiate to like the highest possible salary. And like all of those things are important. And we all have like a very, long career ahead of us, or we can choose to. I know that some people, if you're on sort of the fire movement track, then maybe you're trying to
Absolutely not.
earn as much
Yeah.
as possible and make that career journey as short as possible. So I recognize there's a range of different paths that people are pursuing.
For sure.
But for many of us, I mean, my personal goal is like, I enjoy working. I get a lot of satisfaction out of doing things that I enjoy and creating things in the world. So I want to find a career that works with that. And I think it's helpful to understand that like it's a journey to get to wherever you're trying to go. And being and surrounding yourself with smart people that are going to help build your skills and grow your skills and mentor you are really important.
Yeah, yeah, truly. I love that. That's really cool. So, for you, I know negotiating and increasing your income became a really big part of your journey as well. So, can you kind of tell us what was that negotiation journey like for you throughout your careers? And now, obviously, now that you're a full-time business owner, the negotiation works a little bit differently, I'm sure. But kind of tell us a little bit about your own negotiation journey.
Yeah. So I've negotiated every single job that I've had since my very first job when I was 16.
Amazing. So many of us, specifically women, can't say that. And I love to hear that.
Yeah, and I share that and this is actually through mentorship from my mom, which is really interesting because my mom didn't make a lot growing up, but we actually talked about money all the time in our family. And so I share that for, anyone out there that's a parent, even if you
Mm,
don't have the resources to be able to be saving and investing a bunch of money for your kids, each month in a brokerage account, one of the best gifts you can give your children is just talking about money. And that's
mhm,
going to do so much for them in their life. And so I'm like incredibly grateful. It wasn't that my mom gave me all these like financial resources to be successful, but she set me up for success by talking about money all the time.
mhm.
And she talked about the fact that you can negotiate for things. And so my very first job out of, I think I was about 15 years old in high school, I like went in, they offered me a sales associate job. I was like a cashier at a local store. And I think I was offered like $7.25 an hour, which was like, close to minimum wage at the time.
Yeah.
And I negotiated, and basically what we agreed upon was that they were going to give me $7.25 an hour. But if I stayed there for 6 months and I like met certain criteria, at the 6-month mark, they would bump me up to $7.50, and they would give me back pay for like the prior month.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
25% raise.
That's amazing that you were able to negotiate that at 15. Oh my gosh, I love that.
Well, so what's interesting about that story though, right, is that for people in, business owners with that type of role, they have a hard time retaining people.
Mm-hmm.
So this was strategic on their end. They're like, yeah, we're glad to keep, if we can keep you for at least 6 months, then like it's worth it because your skills have grown over that time. And we want to build a good relationship because we want to keep you past 6 months. And then sure enough, I like stayed at that job and worked there 2.5 years before I went on to college. So yeah, that was my very first negotiating experience.
I love that. That's so cute. I think even when my first like not under the table job was working at Barnes and Noble, and when they offered me like I just assumed it was like, well, this is not negotiable. So I love hearing that even at that young age, when we're working like a minimum wage job, it is negotiable. Like everything is negotiable.
It's certainly worth asking, and I think that's the important thing. So like granted, I was working for like a locally owned company. So if I had been working for Barnes and Noble, they may have had like corporate policies that there wasn't the ability, but like my manager at this small store, she like told me in the conversation, she's like, I really respect you being a young woman and like having this conversation. I actually like see some of myself in you. It's like, I want to be able to like acknowledge that. So let me see what we can do.
That's so cool. I was thinking the same thing when you said that. I was like, if I was the adult in that situation who was hiring a 15-year-old and they were negotiating, I'd be like, hell yeah, I want them to work for me.
Yeah. So that was my very first experience. And then I negotiated every single job that I've had since then, including like my first job out of college. I think I mentioned before, I think I got like $1,000 more than they offered me. So it wasn't substantial, but I think it's just important to always make sure that we're having that conversation because whatever a company offers you as their initial offer isn't, they will have a budget potentially more than that. But if it's helpful, I could talk through some strategies for folks who are like in their careers and are trying to go through increasing their salary in their current role. Does that sound
Absolutely. I think that's super important, especially when so many people are concerned with their job as we are in a recession or depending on who you talk to, entering into one. Yes, absolutely. Please give us the knowledge.
Cool. And yes, I recognize that it is like an anxiety producing time and people might feel concerned about the security of their job. And it's still a valid conversation to always be having because the reality is like companies are companies. They want to retain employees. You are valuable. You've built up skills and experience and they want to keep you. And so maybe it's not a raise, next month, but it's a raise in the future. And it's important to at least be starting that conversation now. So yeah, a couple different tips I think it's important to be mindful of is one, just making sure that you know what your market rate is. And it's easier for some jobs more than others. A lot of tech companies, like you can go on, sites like Glassdoor or PayScale or levels.fyi and, look up what positions pay. A lot of larger Fortune 500 companies have leveling. And so essentially they'll have salary bands for people that are in a level 1 job, level 2 job, level 3 job. And so like there literally is a defined, salary band that you're eligible for. And so it's important to make sure that you know what that is. And I think online resources are helpful, but also literally talking to people and having these conversations. I know for myself, when I was at Google, it was helpful to just like, take a colleague to go chat over lunch and you don't have to like literally ask them what they're paid. You can just be like, hey, like you can disclose about yourself. Like, hey, I'm currently, in this level. I'm really excited about, continuing to grow in my career. Like, I was curious if like a general range of what people at the next level make. And maybe you're talking to someone who is at the next level from you. So you're not directly asking them what their salary is. You're just like asking them a range.
Yeah, 100%. I think that range is really important too, because like I had that same conversation with my mentor and I'd always be like, yeah, so like approximately where are you at? Like what range should I be looking at? And they're always more comfortable with the range answer than the like, what do you make?
Yes. So make sure that you're talking to people and know what's out there and what the potential is. I think that was something that was really important to me. And I've learned a lot about in the last couple of years of like, I didn't even really know what was possible, like how much money
Mm.
people could be making in roles. And oftentimes I think we like feel frustrated in our current job and we maybe just like jump to working at another company. And there is a lot of discussion that you can sort of increase your salary by jumping from company to company. But I also think it's important to make sure that you understand like what is the opportunity at your company and
Mhm.
how do you get there? So that's one thing, is to know just what even is the expectation. I think the second thing is to make sure that you're having regular conversations with your manager about your performance and expectations. And I think an area that people often go wrong is they like wait till their like annual performance review to have that conversation, when many times like salary decisions have already been made for the year.
Mhm.
And so it really should be like a regular and ongoing conversation with your manager of like, hey, let's make sure that there are clear expectations for my role. What are the expectations for my role at the next level, or for a promotion or a salary increase? Let's like literally map out together like the projects that I'm working on that will like demonstrate my abilities, to
Mhm.
demonstrate to you that I'm, meeting those new expectations. And then let's talk about like what's the time frame that an associated bonus or salary increase would come along with that. So that it's not like you don't want to be like hoping and waiting for the performance review and then
Yes.
be like, I hope my salary, I hope I get a bonus. I hope
Well,
I
and
get an
that's the
increase.
thing. So many people wait until the annual review, and it's like, oh, no, 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 no. You need to be having those conversations all year long so that your annual review is more like, all right, so is it happening or is it not happening kind of conversation. Like you said, the budget is already set by the time the annual review comes around. It's like, you gotta start having that conversation a year before, and then you can be checking in all year long to see how your progress is.
100%. And I think it's also important to understand who's actually the decision maker in addition to when decisions are made. So all of this will vary depending on like the size of the company that you work for. But obviously, like smaller companies, typically you might have more negotiating leverage. Maybe there's not as clear of sort of processes. The larger the company, the more structured it is. So, for instance, like Google literally has a team that's focused on pay equity, that they're doing research across the company to make sure that people in similar roles of some, are all being compensated fairly. And they will literally make pay adjustments across the company if they identify groups of people that are being underpaid. Um, but yeah, you want to make sure that you understand who's actually the decision maker. And so sometimes people will think like, oh, my manager is the decision maker. But when you work at a large company, it's actually typically higher up. It may be like your manager's manager or two levels above that, that like they have maybe a budget for your organization.
Mhm.
And so you want to make sure that not just your manager knows about your work, but the people broadly in the organization that you work for, and that you're presenting and socializing your good work with all of them, because it may not actually be your manager who has a direct say about this. It's probably folks above them. So you want to make sure that folks above them also understand the work that
Mm.
you're doing.
Yeah, good tip. I love that.
And then lastly, I'd say sometimes you also need to know like, when is the conversation heading in a good direction versus when do you maybe need to consider moving on or leaving a company. And so I do think it's, ultimately you want to make sure that you're building a really good relationship with your manager and the people broadly on your team, and that they're advocating for you and championing your career. And sometimes we don't find that, right? Like sometimes it's not a good fit between ourselves or our manager. Sometimes we don't enjoy the work, we're not motivated, whatever it may be. And so I think it's also important to understand that like when it's just not working, or you've had multiple conversations and things aren't going in a good direction, maybe it's time to look for a different role at that company, or maybe it's time to leave and go to another company. And those are also really good things that you can do sometimes to help you grow your salary in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's such an important note to end on, because the thing is, if they're not going to value you and growing your skill set there, then it's not going to be the right place for you long term. Like it's more like that's a band-aid until you're able to find a place that is growth oriented. And that conversation to find out if you're entering into a company that is growth oriented needs to be happening in the interview process. Because if you're entering into a new company, if you can, you've got to think of it like, I'm interviewing my new boss. I'm interviewing this new company to see if they're going to even value my skill set. Because if they don't, you probably don't want to be there, especially long term.
Yeah, and I think that was something that actually surprised me in my role at Google is that uh, my salary grew substantially over the time that I was there because there was potential for me to grow in my
Mhm,
role. And so I think you're totally right that it's not just about the initial offer that you get, but it's also about like what's the long-term potential and
mhm.
making sure that you're building towards that over time and not judging things just initially from the initial package that you get with a company.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Well, Beth, these were such good tips. I'm literally going to make my sister, I'm going to text her after this and be like, hey, here are a few things I need you to do.
Love it.
Um,
Love it.
Thank you so much. So I have two more questions for you. One is just tell us where can people find you, promote yourself, tell them what you got going on.
Yeah, so people can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram at Your Future Wallet. Folks can also reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter as well. And I currently offer group coaching programs for millennial women, as well as one on one coaching, and also speak at companies. So if you work at a company and want someone to come talk about money, come hit me up and come find me. And
Love it. Awesome. And we'll leave links to your social media and all that good stuff down below. And my final question for you is a question that I ask everybody. What is your very first money memory?
ooh, good one. And I actually like just taught a workshop last week that I asked those questions to the women that were participating.
It's always fun to hear what people come up with. And like, it's like a 50-50 chance. It could be something positive. It could be something negative. And I'm always like, all right, if we end on a negative, I got a second question for you at the end. But either way.
Yeah. So you know what? It's honestly hard for me to pinpoint like what is my very first money memory because money was talked about constantly when I was a
Mhm.
kid. I think one that like sticks in my memory is I was about 8 years old and we had just gotten home from school. And my mom like went out to the mailbox because the mailman had just arrived and dropped off the mail. And she like came inside and she opened up it was our water bill. Um, or sorry, it was not our water bill. It was our electricity bill. Although I think a similar situation happened with our water bill later.
Yeah.
But so she opened up our electricity bill and she like turned to my brother and I and she was like, Brian and Beth, like our electricity bill like went up by like $5 this month. Like we really need to be like turning off lights when we're not in the room and like doing everything we can to like make sure that it doesn't continue to go up. And it's interesting because I like think about that as an adult and I'm like, this is very much sort of like and I love my mom and I'm very close with her and I empathize entirely where she was coming from in the moment. And I think it's very much this like scarcity mindset of like money is limited, resources are limited. If our electricity goes up by $5, like we don't have the extra money to pay for that. So
Mhm.
like we need to reduce our electricity consumption as opposed to having sort of more of an abundance mindset of like, okay, electricity bill went up $5. How do we increase our income? How do we generate more income in our life such that this isn't
Mm.
a stressor for us? And so I think for me, that was like the huge takeaway that I had as a kid is like, what are the things that I can be doing to generate more money, to bring in more income, and really like lean into that as a way to feel more comfortable in my life as opposed to having to cut back. And so I think
Right.
that's been like a huge theme. It's literally why I mentioned before, like I've negotiated every single job that I've had because I've always had this mindset of like, how can I generate and create more income for myself? Because I don't want to constantly be in this place of feeling like I have to be scrimping
Cutting
and cutting
back.
back.
Right. I love that. That's such a good example of like how that mindset can even get started without even realizing it. Because that's one of the reasons that I have never been a super frugal person or super promoting super frugal lifestyles. Like I never will promote like a no spend month or anything along those lines. I used to try those things, but eventually you get to the point where you just realize like the amount of growth that potential that comes with the abundance mindset versus the amount of like making yourself smaller with the scarcity mindset. To me, I think the abundance and focusing on how can I increase my income while, of course, managing our income. But focusing on that, I think, is a lot more powerful than constantly thinking about the small stuff and like really, I don't know, it just doesn't feel empowering when you're thinking about all the ways that you can cut back and make your life smaller.
Yeah, no, it really is. And like transparently, that is the mindset that like allowed me to leave my job at Google and start
Mhm.
my own business. That like if I wasn't sort of thinking aggressively and assertively about one, how can I increase my income? But then two, once I get there, how can I not totally lean into lifestyle inflation, but
Right.
instead really focus on saving and investing that income and building a safety net for myself. Like transparently, I never would have been able to start, take the leap and start my business and focus on it full time if I wasn't able to build that for myself when I was at Google. And so I think it's important to really cultivate this for ourselves and think strategically about, as we grow our income, what are we doing with it in order to build that financial flexibility or financial independence for ourselves.
Ooh, I like that financial flexibility. That's got a really nice ring to it.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, I talk about that often with my clients.
Yes, very good. Well, thank you so much again for coming on today. I learned a lot, and like I said, Sydney, you better be listening because this is going to be a great podcast episode for you.
Thank you so much for having me, Chloe. This has been a pleasure.
For sure. Okay, Beth gave so many good tips that I'm legitimately going to be sending this podcast episode to my sister, who is currently searching for a new job, which means we might have a virtual assistant opening for Clobear. I'll keep you guys posted. But anyway, thank you so much, Beth, for coming on. And I just got to echo all the things she said. I've experienced as well. Make sure to be leveraging that network. Make sure to be going out and meeting people and doing a good job and making sure that you're developing those connections that could turn into future job opportunities or things like that along the line. And make sure to always be negotiating. I'm so impressed that this woman has been negotiating since her very first job out of college. And even before that, pretty impressive. So I wish I had done that. I probably would have made more money in my 9-to-5 career, but I did not start investing, I don't think, until I was, 2 jobs into my career. And I remember the first time I even attempted to negotiate, they just were like, ha ha ha, that's hilarious. We offered you more than what you asked for. So no. But we live and we learn, and now I'm negotiating now. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episodes. Like I said, we'll leave links to everything down in the show notes. But if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And again, don't forget, we've got that free recession guide down in the show notes. That's at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/recession. So it's always in the link in my bio as well, or you can DM me for it. And yeah. So since we're talking about money, since we're talking about promotions, just a friendly reminder that nothing on this episode is intended to be financial advice, legal advice, career advice, tax advice, any of the advices. It's just opinion, storytelling, entertainment, all that good stuff. And if you would like to see our full terms and conditions, you can check out the link in the show notes. So that's all I've got for you guys this week. And thanks so much for listening. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.